Bill 88, the Provincial Working for Workers Act passed in April. Part of this bill required Ontario employers with 25 or more employees to have a written electronic monitoring policy in place by October 11th. That date is now passed, and this has created some privacy concerns from academics such as our next guest, Dr. Paul Gray from Brock University. Dr. Gray, where do you see the bill's shortcomings when it comes to privacy?
Well, let me start by saying that, it does one good thing from the outset, that I think it's good for employers to disclose to their employees all of the different ways in which they're being electronically monitored. Nevertheless, there are shortcomings to this legislation. It says that employers have to have a written policy about electronic monitoring that is accessible to employees. What it doesn't do is it doesn't stipulate what has to be included in that written policy. It doesn't create any new rights for employees about how they can be monitored, for what reasons, or what privacy rights they have. It doesn't say what kind of data can be collected, how it can be used. And so this is one of a few major shortcomings that the legislation has.
Dr. Gray, since the onset of the pandemic, people started working from home more often, and now that things are a little bit more back to normal, many are involved in a hybrid type of situation. Are you concerned that there's going to be some digital surveillance on people in the comforts of their own homes?
It's not just monitoring GPS and cell phones of people when they're out, driving for work, or using a work phone. Now, with more workers working from home, working with their computers, work computers, maybe even personal computers, there's various forms of technology that allow for the monitoring, some would say surveillance, as you just did, of these workers, tracking their keystrokes, the emails, the websites they're visiting. And this raises some questions about what data is being collected and how it's being stored.
Have we lost a sense of trust in the work world between employers and employees? Is that what this is signifying?
I think so. During the pandemic, as many workers who could work from home did work from home, you would often have debates around, whether or not productivity would go down now that workers weren't, or many workers at least, weren't in a centralized workplace at company headquarters or the like. Actually, most of the statistics that come out have said that productivity increased during the pandemic, despite the turn to more home-based work. But yes, I think there is a kind of lack of trust there of employees.
What would you like to see added to this bill to, I guess, ensure the safety and the privacy of employees? And is it likely that any changes would ever come?
Well, I would like to see some regulations, some minimum standards about how data is stored so it's kept safe, and the minimum standards around trying to prevent breaches of this data and information getting out, and what the employer has to do, who they have to inform the employees, government institutions, when a breach has occurred. That's one thing. Another thing is some regulations around how long this data can be kept, including data on employees who have long left the company. Another thing that I'd like to see is that there's some transparency, that employees can access the data that has been collected on them, that they can verify its accuracy. They can see the ways in which this data is being used to evaluate their performance, and also maybe detecting any biases that might arise in the way in which the data is collected, stored, and sorted and used for evaluations. There are various technologies and algorithms that, because they're created by human beings, can have some of the biases and prejudices of human beings, and that these can reproduce forms of discrimination in the use of this technology to sort through all of this data. So these are some of some of the rights that I think these workers should have, and that would make this policy much more robust. Another thing that I think is a major shortcoming of this legislation is that while employers are expected to have a written policy that is communicated to workers, and workers can lodge a complaint in a situation where the employers don't have a written policy or they can't access it, uh, workers are not being provided an avenue by means, a way in which they can lodge a complaint if they discover that their employer is violating their own policy. It doesn't create a kind of streamlined system where workers can lodge a complaint on that level, and that's another major shortcoming. So I'd like to see that. Whether we can expect these kinds of changes being introduced, new legislation being introduced, I don't think so. Not under the current government. I'm skeptical.
Dr. Gray, some great suggestions. Thank you for sharing your concerns about Bill 88 with us today.